This video will probably seem like a slight departure from my normal channel content for subscribers. I try to keep my videos structured and pointed, but this one is going to ramble and meander quite a bit because I have a lot I want to say about the election results. And yes, Thunderfoot, for those of you who clicked on this video because his name's in the title. So let me dive right in here. First of all, I have to admit I thought Hillary would win. And actually, I was fairly convinced she would win. So I guess I deserve some criticism for not reading the political tea leaves correctly or whatever. It's not that I wanted her to win. It's just that I thought her presidency was a flat-out inevitability after all the bogus Trump accusers were trotted out during the run-up to the election. In fact, I was prepared to excoriate the alt-right and more mainstream Trump supporters for focusing so much on race and ignoring the almighty power of the golden uterus in a video that would have been much different than this one. But that obviously would be pretty ridiculous now. I don't even remember how many accusers there were, but every day in October seemed to produce another one, and another poll suggesting it helped Hillary. I'll get to the polls later on in this video, among many other topics I want to cover. And let me just take a moment now to remind everyone that any sources I use can be found below in the video description. Think back to what was really the first accuser the mainstream media featured prominently at the beginning of last month, Jessica Leeds, who claimed that Trump groped her on a plane some 30 years ago. As soon as her story came out, all the Black Lives Matter stuff just magically went poof, like someone had thrown a switch. Because oppressed vaginas take priority over oppressed non-whites, or so I thought at the time at least. But something about the old feminist tricks don't work quite as well anymore. They're not quite as effective as they once were, or so you would figure from Trump winning the presidency. Anyway, I have to admit I don't fully understand what happened or changed to allow for a Trump presidency because, again, I truly thought Hillary had this one in the bag and was gearing up to deal with her bullshit for 4 long, torturous years, possibly even 8. I don't know, maybe the sheer number of 11th hour accusers backfired on Democratic supporters who hoped the avalanche would bury Trump's campaign. And the absurdity of adding a porn star, Jessica Drake, into the mix and having her hire a lawyer because Trump allegedly kissed her without consent really could have been the straw that broke the camel's back or poisoned the anti-Trump well, who knows. Maybe their cunning overreached their aim. To steal a line from J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion, the public could have simply sympathized more with Anthony Weiner's alleged 15-year-old sexting victim and held Hillary partly to blame since he was her top aide's husband. Seems doubtful to me that something like that would discourage support for Hillary. People who would vote for her have an uncanny knack for tuning out any of her liabilities. Besides, it's always just seemed to be the case that the concerns of adult women take priority over everybody else's concerns, including children, even female ones. Because remember, as a society, you can always make more kids, provided you're still protecting and prioritizing your adult women. If you lose them, or they're so unhappy they shut off the reproductive taps, you're kind of shit out of luck. As a society wishing to repopulate, maybe we're witnessing a subtle change in societal priorities. Maybe an influx of migrants, which feminists and social justice warriors wanted so badly, from less progressive societies, shall we say, is causing an upsurge in conservative values that progressives like feminists didn't anticipate and aren't going to like all that much. I mean, it could even be that anti-feminist content producers and social media accounts are actually having an effect to disrupt all the due process destroying listen and believe bullshit feminists are forcing on society. And that's why bogus Trump accusers didn't seal the deal for Hillary, as expected. Shit, maybe even MGTOW is making people stand up and take notice finally. I'd very much like that to be true, if there were some way to verify that this is in fact the case and people are starting to get it and appreciate anti-feminist and anti-social justice warrior arguments and the raw deal men are getting pretty much everywhere out there. It would probably be, for me, the most promising aspect of a Trump election win. If the court of public opinion is shying away from worshiping the golden uterus, well, that can only mean positive things for men out there who have become public enemy number one for daring to have pointier genitalia, and to try to use them from time to time. It could be some combination of all those things at work, I guess, and some things I've failed to even think of or mention. I welcome suggestions and comments. But whatever the reason or reasons, something appears to have changed out there, and societal attitudes have shifted somewhat, to some degree. The old tricks which have gotten feminists and women in general so many positive results from the court of public opinion over the past few years are no longer automatically having the desired effect. Gynocentrism is still there, obviously, and it won't be going away anytime soon, but maybe it has taken a much-needed hit and diminished in potency. I'm really just thinking out loud here and not married to any of these ideas I'm throwing out there. And I welcome any corrections or somebody telling me that I'm making a foolish assumption. That's fine. Because I'm really just trying to digest the shocking aspects of this election, or what still seems shocking to me about it anyway. Take, for instance, the fact that over 50% of white women voted for Trump. Now, you could say that women are 51% of the population, and ever since getting the right to vote have always determined who gets into office, and have mostly voted for male politicians, and especially presidents. So it should come as a surprise to no one that they voted for Trump, especially considering how corrupt his opponent is. And I really can't argue. Historically, it has indeed been the case that women vote for men, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten into office. More recently, however, there is a trend of female politicians growing in numbers, so it would seem a Trump win indicates some kind of recoil from that tendency. And a suggestion that we can just flat out ignore the opinions of mainstream media pundits and the polls as well, because they seem to be freaking useless. So now is probably a good time to get into those pundits and those polls and think about some reasons why they were so horribly wrong. Now, the quick and easy answer is that the mainstream media and pollsters were Hillary shills that deliberately put opinions and numbers out there to make Trump supporters feel alienated and alone, and to make them doubt their decision in order to increase her chances of winning. Given the obvious mainstream media bias for Hillary, it's not a crazy notion. But a friend of mine recently made an excellent point that might suggest that the press and pollsters were so drunk on their own left-leaning power that they fooled even themselves. Think about it. PC culture and social justice and feminism have become so overbearing in the past few years, especially in the social circles that members of the press frequent, that people fear too much for their jobs and careers to speak out against these authoritarian beliefs or openly state their honest but opposing opinions. Imagine being a professor in a university who supports Trump. Would you ever in a million years tell your colleagues or your friends at media publications that you like Trump? Scott Adams talked about lying to his liberal snob friends and telling them that he supported Hillary to protect himself from physical injury in a recent Dave Rubin interview.
You see what I've done here? I said you endorse Trump or something. Yeah. I'm putting you in the alt-right.
I disavowed Trump. I disavow everybody except Hillary Clinton because that's best for my personal safety.
Yeah. How much of that do you think is just that there's a certain fear of saying you're for Trump? So people don't poll properly? Probably
a lot of it. I know a lot of people who say that they won't say out loud that they support Trump. Because since I said that I support Hillary Clinton for my personal safety.
Yeah, I want to get to that, yeah.
Because I live in California where that's kind of important. I've heard from people who say the same thing. They say, oh my God, I can't say it at work, I can't say it to my family, I can't say it to my friends. Mm-hmm. How many there are is the great mystery. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they're being picked up in polling necessarily.
Yeah. Now, he was joking to a large extent, but there's a little bit of truth in it. He almost certainly did indeed tell his friends what they wanted to hear about Hillary in order to avoid their wrath or some uncomfortable social situation or discussion, even if it may not have translated into an actual assault. In the present academic and mainstream media atmosphere, where every opinion that does not toe the liberal, multicultural party line is sexism and racism and hatred, simply mentioning that you will vote for Trump could get you ostracized or even fired. So the PC police, in a sense, are shooting themselves in the foot with their desire to censor everyone. Because if everyone is tight-lipped about their true leanings and feelings, there's really no way to know for sure which way the wind will ultimately blow. And therefore, as an authoritarian bully, it may very well seem to you that everything is swell and running according to plan, and there's no need to adjust your strategy. Forcing people to go along to get along might not be doing you any favors in the end, because you and the pressures of your elitist social group can't follow them into the voting booth. Now, this progressive peer pressure explains, or could explain, how the blowhard media pundits easily deluded themselves into a sanguine prediction of a Hillary victory, especially as they eagerly and uncritically absorbed poll results that confirmed their Hillary bias. But I guess the question is, how could it affect the actual polling itself? Well, assuming honesty on the part of pollsters, I really don't know. So I have to imagine there was some kind of dishonesty at work, or at least self-deception and overconfidence for the success of past predictions. I think 2000 Gore-Bush was the last time the majority of presidential polls forecast the incorrect result, but someone can correct me on that if I'm wrong. There's the Democratic voter oversampling during this election cycle, which at first blush seems intentional, but pollsters tell us the results are weighted to account for such things. I mean, again, I honestly don't know. Do your own research here and draw your own conclusions. If I had to guess at gunpoint what went wrong with the polling this time around, I would say that somehow, intentional or otherwise, there was a systematic overrepresentation of Clinton's support in these polls, and pollsters couldn't be bothered to question it or didn't dare to for reasons already mentioned. And remember one thing, these polls are still conducted by phone between real people, and pressure to appear PC these days may in fact be strong enough to affect the honesty of answers given in these over-the-phone situations. Are friends, family, or coworkers nearby and listening when people give their poll responses? Do people care what those on the other end of the line asking the questions think about their political opinions? Who knows anymore? Whatever went down, the authoritarian PC police could not have helped matters. That much is inarguable. Okay, so if you suffered through all that dry supposition on my part, and you're still with me here, you've made it to the fun part where a small nobody channel like mine takes on a YouTube giant like Thunderfoot. And I can't promise that I'll be getting less long-winded. That's just not in my nature, I guess. And besides, we're about to get into some really dense and heady stuff, but I do promise to try and make my statements and criticisms more concrete and less speculative from here on. Thunderfoot makes the following fairly straightforward claim about his Trump criticism.
We'll see what damage you can get from having an anti-vaxxer, climate change denial, pro-creation ticket in the White House. Either way, I'm going to be here giving my independent, critical analysis of these things, based on the facts.
And I tried to get Thunderfoot to engage on Twitter, but he chose to ignore me, which is completely understandable considering how small my following is. And Twitter is a difficult medium to discuss these complex topics anyway. So I'll try and explain more clearly here in this video why I believe he is in fact ignoring important scientific facts rather than focusing on them as he claims. And we'll see if he cares to respond because, again, I'm small potatoes. Earlier I mentioned the possibility of anti-feminism having some positive effects in preventing Clinton's presidency. So it's curious to me when I see anti-feminists like Thunderfoot throw their support in with Hillary.
What the fuck has it come to, America? When given the choice, the woman currently under investigation by the FBI is actually the better choice.
And make no mistake, Hillary was the feminist candidate. I mean, obviously between her and Trump, she was the feminist candidate. But even considering the independents, she was the feminist candidate. Hillary probably had more feminist support than the other two feminist candidates, Bernie during the primaries and Jill Stein in the general election, combined, despite a small vocal feminist minority expressing reservations about her. And keeping Hillary as the clear feminist candidate in mind, I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone, probably unnecessarily, that Thunderfoot is fond of making statements like the following.
So why does feminism poison everything? And I really mean everything.
Feminism poisons everything except the White House, apparently. Maybe I shouldn't have been so surprised by Thunderfoot's endorsement. Actually, endorsement or support are probably too strong a choice of words here. So let's say preference for Clinton. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised by his preference for Clinton after his stance on Brexit, and we'll get into Brexit a little later. And to be fair, a lot of other people I'm a fan of, follow or subscribe to or whatever, some of whom criticize feminism as vociferously as Thunderfoot, preferred Hillary as well, or at least couldn't be bothered to recognize her as the greater of two evils. And some examples of that would be Uberfeminist on Twitter, who was pretty firmly in Clinton's camp, and the amazing Atheist on YouTube, who chose for whatever reason not to make a choice between the two candidates. And some that supported Hillary, whose content I listen to pretty regularly, like Sam Harris, probably consider themselves straight up feminists, or at least would say they're pro-feminism. And despite my own anti-feminism and opposition to Hillary, I will continue to try to understand and appreciate their opinions, even though I disagree with them strongly on these topics. I'm not going to be unfollowing their Twitters or unsubscribing from their channels or rage quitting their podcasts. I don't think throwing the baby out with the bathwater is a good policy, especially over a difference of opinion on who's the shittier candidate, and that's really what this comes down to. If I had to guess, I would say Sam Harris's strong anti-Trump opinions influenced Thunderfoot's Hillary choice pretty heavily.
Well, it has come to pass. President Trump, a man whom many of us treated as a buffoon and only took seriously as a threat at the 11th hour, will be the 45th President of the United States. So, what went wrong, and how bad is this? Trump has ascended to power despite showing every sign of being dangerously unfit for it, and by exposing in himself and in the electorate the worst that America has to offer: racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, a contempt for the most vulnerable among us, intimations of fascism, a positive love of bullying, total disdain for our democratic institutions, a willingness to make threats of political violence just for the fun of it, a contempt for science, and a love of conspiracy theories. I mean, there are really no words to describe how far from normal we have drifted here. So the question now is, how do we move forward, having declared the next president to be an absolute jackass and a sexual predator, and as I said in a previous podcast, a liar of a sort one would only expect to find in a mental hospital? It's as if we're all on an airplane together, and the real pilot has died. Okay, and now a man who has never flown an airplane has taken the controls and is attempting an emergency landing. And we're all stuck in the back of the plane. This guy stormed the cockpit, and now he's in the pilot's seat, and the runway is in view, and we are out of time. We want him to land this plane, okay, and it doesn't have to be pretty. Okay, it doesn't matter if we all wind up covered in vomit. We will be grateful just to be alive. And I will be very grateful if after 4 years, Donald Trump hasn't set back human progress a generation. But we're about to find out what happens to a man with a famously, palpably, visibly unhealthy ego who suddenly triumphs over everyone who ever doubted him.
Thunderfoot, like myself, is a devotee of the new Atheists, or the Four Horsemen, whichever you prefer. And with Hitchens dead and Dennett and Dawkins slowing down quite a bit due to age and medical issues, that really leaves Sam as the final remaining voice of New Atheism, or the last horseman, if you will. It's pretty strange to think how quickly we moved on from their prominence in social and political discourse. But Hitch was the hotshot star, after all, and he's gone. And they certainly had numerous enemies waiting in the wings to waylay them at any sign of weakness. Many from within the atheist movement itself, unfortunately. But that's a different story and a different topic altogether for a different video. So why am I singling out Thunderfoot, right? When I have all these choices of people I enjoy following, listening to, watching videos they made, etc., who have chosen poorly in this election. Well, I think his past and present statements are the most clearly dichotomous and self-contradictory, and they are illustrative of how sticking to the science is a fantastic ideal and everything, so long as you stick to all the science, or at least all the facts surrounding the science, and don't cherry-pick the ones that confirm your biases. So without any more verbal futzing around here, let's get into it. Thunderfoot kind of stuck to a trifecta, so to speak, of criticisms against Trump, and those were that he's an anti-vaxxer, a climate change denier, and he's pro-waterboarding. And that's why Thunderfoot feels Clinton was the lesser of two evils. So let's just address these points in turn. Thunderfoot is making the faulty assumption here that being anti-vax and being a social justice warrior are mutually exclusive somehow. And maybe I know why he makes this assumption, because if you look at the sphere of influence he is kind of part of, and the social justice warriors that he has personally butted heads with in the past, like Rebecca Watson, P.Z. Myers, and Dr. Richard Carrier, among other members of this screwy Atheism Plus and Free Thought Blogs sphere or crowd or whatever. People who I've actually run into and had disagreements with in the past as well. But if you take these people into account, you can kind of understand why he might make this mistake. Becky and PZ and the Dickster are, to their credit, diehard rationalists and skeptics who generally get things like vaccination science right, but who, for whatever reason, fall hook, line, and sinker for social justice and feminist hocus pocus like patriarchy and rape culture, and in the Dickster's case, to his own extreme personal and legal detriment. But assuming that these people represent the majority feminist or social justice warrior opinion out there is like assuming Jill Stein supporters and not Hillary supporters are the social justice warrior or feminist rule, so to speak. It just ain't the case. Plenty of feminists and social justice warriors hold the anti-science, anti-vax opinion that it is sexist to question a mother's right to not vaccinate her child. Let me read a quick excerpt from a feminist blog here that illustrates this.
I think the vaccine debate is often a hidden misogyny. I love and respect science, which I worked in for a decade. But believing in science doesn't mean I have to ignore non-science. So here are some things that are terribly misogynistic to say to a mother. You just don't remember the death and destruction before vaccines. You don't understand the science. You just follow Jenny McCarthy. You are harming your children. You are harming your community. I know an awful lot of non-vaccine moms, and none of them are alarmists or uneducated on vaccines. None of them are shitty moms that don't care about their kids. They are smart, compassionate, wonderful mothers who have made a decision for their families that should be respected, even if you disagree with it. I'm all about common ground. I know that vaccines are a heated issue. I don't expect pro-vax people to completely understand my viewpoint. I do expect that we can both respect the humanity in each of us.
But alright, maybe you don't think Hillary taking up with the social justice movement would encourage screwball anti-vaxxer feminist mothers like this. who think some pointless stance about strong, independent women and female choice and all that happy backward horse shit is more important than vaccinating kids. But you at least have to appreciate Clinton's own anti-vaxxer words, or at least I would expect you would. Likely 2016 Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton had a similar statement while speaking to an anti-vaccine group on the campaign trail in 2008. I am committed to making investments to find the causes of autism, including possible environmental causes like vaccines, said Clinton in a written response to the group. Now, she may have made less anti-scientific statements in this 2016 election cycle regarding vaccines, but that's the thing with Clinton, isn't it? She'll tell people whatever she thinks they want to hear from one minute to the next, and from one interest group to the next. If you don't like what she said about being pro-vaccine, stick around because she'll be anti-vax again in short order if it suits her politically. So calling out just Trump on this point, on this anti-vaccination point, is really short-sighted, to put it charitably, Thunderfoot. And frankly, you should be at least a little embarrassed by your willful ignorance here. You can't tell where Clinton actually stands and what she truly believes on any subject. She's a shameless political chameleon, so giving her credit for being pro-vaccination is just ridiculous. And that segues us nicely to the next criticism of Trump Thunderfoot likes to throw around, that he is a climate change denier, which is almost certainly true, but once again willfully ignores the egg on Clinton's face with regards to this subject. What do I mean by this? Well, we are still reeling from the Clintons' ignorant canceling of nuclear programs and research in the 90s, when we probably still had a chance to curb CO2 emissions effectively enough with nuclear power generation instead of coal-burning plants. But I'm just a layman with a computer science degree, so don't take my word for it. Listen to what Mr. Climate Change himself, James Hansen, has to say about this.
I think the only hope that we have of phasing down emissions and getting to the middle of the century with a much lower level of fossil fuel emissions, which is what we will have to do if we want young people to have a future, then we're going to have to find alternatives. And at this time, nuclear seems to be the best candidate. I think it's unfortunate that so many environmentalists are just assuming that these renewable energies will be able to satisfy all of our requirements. Renewables are only providing about 1%, between 1 and 2%. The soft renewables, the hydropower provides a significant amount of electricity, but that's limited as to how much of that we can have. And the hope that the wind and the sun and geothermal can provide all of our energy is a nice idea, but I find it unlikely that's possible. The environmental community is basically asking the governments to try to reduce their emissions and asking them to subsidize clean energies. Well, that simply doesn't work because we don't get enough energy from the renewables to make a difference. And that then forces any government to approve expanded oil drilling, hydrofracking to get more gas, mountaintop removal to get coal. We're not going to turn the lights out. No government, no president or governor is going to turn out the lights. There has to be energy. And if renewables aren't providing it, then it's been fossil fuels. The scientists that developed nuclear power, they did not expect these light water reactors, which is what we have now and have had for 50 years. These are so-called thermal reactors, which the neutrons are slowed down. So it's one way to generate energy from the nuclear fuel, but it uses less than 1% of the energy in the nuclear fuel. there's an alternative in which you let the neutrons move faster, these so-called fast reactors, which can burn more than 99% of the energy in the fuel. And it can, in fact, then leave a waste pile, which is much smaller and which has a half-life measured in decades instead of millennia. So the big problem with the current generation of nuclear reactors, that they have this waste pile that you have to babysit for millennia, that can be solved with the next generation of nuclear technology. But the problem was that when the United States scientists got that technology to the point where it was close to being time that they could make a commercial reactor, the program was turned off. And I think it was because of the influence of the anti-nuclear people who realized that if this newer technology were developed, it would mean that we would have an energy source which is practically inexhaustible. It could last for billions of years. And they succeeded in getting the Clinton administration to terminate the R&D for the fourth generation nuclear power plants.
Who knows if it's too late now to prevent the more serious effects of climate change? It might be, it might not be. But the fact of the matter is, losing 2 long critical decades of American leadership on nuclear power generation for the rest of the world to take notice of and follow along with, thanks to ignorant Clinton policy, has truly fucked us when it comes to our ability to limit global temperature increases. A few years back, when I was into this issue pretty hot and heavy, and maintaining a climate change blog no one cared to read, and arguing with some pretty famous deniers like Stephen Goddard, more for my own personal entertainment than anything else really, climate scientists even then were talking about a 4 degrees Celsius increase by the end of the 21st century. If that's true, and I stress if that is true, then just hope you're not around when the climate shit hits the fan, because a 4-degree global increase is an absolute shit show for human civilization. There's no other way to put it. We are talking about things like massive worldwide crop failures and instantaneous sea level rise from giant ice sheets calving off in Greenland and Antarctica. It won't be fun if, again, it's true, and I will again stress the if in that statement for the benefit of deniers who will watch this video and flip their shit over me supposedly guaranteeing catastrophic consequences. So if 4 degrees is the case, and I guess really if there's some lesser increase as well, then Democrats and liberals have got to admit that the window of opportunity to avoid such effects closed decades ago in the 90s, and they bear just as much responsibility for unplugging our one real hope as a species to maintain modernity and the power it needs and avoid the worst climate change might have to offer us. But Planet Evans, you will protest, that was Bill Clinton's administration back in the 90s, not Hillary's. Well, I can't find public statements about nuclear power from Hillary back when she was First Lady in the 90s, but I would bet she was one of those NIMBY, or not in my backyard, for those who don't remember or don't know what that acronym stands for. She was one of those NIMBY moms who thought nuclear power was an environmental disaster waiting to happen, and I would even go so far as to suggest that Hillary privately swayed her husband into making that fateful decision to cut the fast reactor R&D that James Hansen mentioned. But fine, once again, forget all my speculation, and I promise not to be speculative, because we have our own words as a politician to reference, and once again, we get to bask in the joyous flip-flopping political glow that is Hillary Clinton's opinion, because depending upon how the nuclear wind is blowing, she will tell you whatever you want to hear when it comes to nuclear power generation, just like she does with vaccines.
I'm agnostic about nuclear power. John is right that until we figure out what we're going to do with the waste and the cost, it's very hard to see nuclear as a part of our future.
I think nuclear power has to be part of our energy solution.
So just speaking specifically to nuclear power, can you, as president, would you encourage the construction of future and more nuclear power plants?
No, that's why I've not included it in my plan.
According to the Daily Caller's energy and science reporter, Andrew Follett, Hillary has flipped her nuclear stance at least 8 times. So if you're concerned that Trump's a climate change denier, it's pretty hypocritical to ignore the negative effects the Clintons have had on nuclear policy, and therefore actual CO2 emissions in the past few decades. Trump's trolling in hot air doesn't amount to much until he gets to put his money where his mouth is and starts enacting actual harmful policy like the Clintons have actually done now that he's been elected. How we generate our power is certainly a major concern if we're worried about greenhouse gases, but anyone educated on the issue knows the real elephant in the room is overpopulation. And there's a lot to say about this topic, and this video is already running very long, so I will try to be as brief as possible here. Trump and pro-Brexit politicians in the UK, without even realizing it, are going to do us all a big league favor, as the US president-elect might say, when it comes to climate change. Whereas Clinton and Remainers would have unwittingly stuck the red-hot rising global temperature thermometer right up our collective sphincter. What do I mean by this? It's simple. Migration of Muslim refugees. This migration is touted as a cure for declining Western birth rates. But again, don't take my word for it. Let someone Thunderfoot is fond of including in his videos bashing Trump explain it.
The maddening thing here is Europe doesn't even need to do this for good reasons. It can do it for selfish ones, because as a continent, it is in dire need of new citizens.
According to the UN, the average woman needs to have 2.1 children to maintain the population of a developed country. But in the European Union, every single country is below that 2.1 level. By 2050, some countries like Greece, Portugal, and Germany will see their populations drop by double-digit percentages, according to Pew.
That's true. If Europe doesn't open its doors to more migrants, this is not the changing face of Europe they should be frightened of. This is. This one right here.
Look, if we are supposed to be taking climate change seriously, then declining birth rates can only be a good thing, not a serious threat. And yes, I understand there are economic impacts from demographic decline, but they will be fucking negligible compared to the economic impacts of serious global temperature increase. You have to be a fool to not realize this. And that goes for an obvious intelligent person like Thunderfoot, too. He'd have to be a total climate change hypocrite to think this is not the case. So we should not be importing Muslims to help Germany and Portugal or wherever have babies. We should in fact be finding ways to export whatever it is that has led to lower developed world birth rates into the developing world. We should in fact be doing or orchestrating the exact opposite of what's happening now. And I know this won't be easy given economic realities in the third world. And maybe I'll talk about options in a follow-up video, but it's way too dense a topic to get into now. But however we go about it, whatever tactics we ultimately adopt, if there are any available to us, and if we care to make the effort, we should be working on peacefully cutting their birth rates and preventing 10 billion plus humans by mid-century, not bringing them here to increase our own birth rates and all but guarantee that much CO2 emitting humanity by 2050. So the UK Brexiting and any other countries leaving the European Union to protest unvetted, limitless refugee migration will help massively in that regard. Same goes for Trump, who will stem the migration tide here in the States, whereas Clinton would have brought in who knows how many Muslim refugees on top of the migration America is already experiencing from South and Central America and Mexico, which is probably the only reason U.S. birth rates are higher than sagging European ones. And no, I'm not saying all of this because I'm racist. I'm no fan of the alt-right's preferred reaction to this migration either.
Although it has to be said that on the first day especially, I saw lots of white couples with white children, and you know, it's reassuring. But not enough of them. Fuck, I mean, is there anywhere that we're having enough kids?
I often see eye to eye with alt-righters about Islam and stemming the Muslim tide, that's true. but having more white babies is one of the many instances where I part ways with them. The worst case scenario for everyone involved, in my opinion, is a contest between white nationalists and Muslims to see if one group can out-baby the other and produce more white babies or produce more brown babies. It's a fucking horrifying race to the bottom that none of us can win in an overpopulated modern world where lower birth rates can only be a net positive. But frankly, I almost feel like it's inevitable at this point, given the asinine liberal policies regarding immigration that powerful people like Merkel and Clinton are backing.
Look, I like a lot of the world leaders. One of my favorites is Angela Merkel. Her bravery in the face of the refugee crisis is something that I am impressed by.
White nationalists are not going to sit idly by while demographics change in their disfavor. They're just not fucking going to do it. They're either going to rebel violently and/or crank out more white babies. And I'm not particularly thrilled by the prospect of either reaction. Okay, so I've definitely drifted off course when it comes to criticizing Thunderfoot. So let me make one last criticism here, and I'll move on. And let me just point out that I'm going to skip the whole waterboarding thing altogether, because I think it's relatively inconsequential and it will just add unnecessary length to an already never-ending video. If he cares to respond to what I've said so far, which I doubt he will, I'll try and address it in my follow-up video, try to address waterboarding, that is. What I want to talk about instead is something that, as a fan of Thunderfoot, really floored me when I heard it.
And you get all of these absurd defenses by Trump and Trump supporters that all these women are lying. Jesus, guys, it's not exactly like there's a disagreement over the facts here. Trump is the one who is bragging about groping women because he could get away with it.
I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
Now, the reason why this took me by surprise is because Thunderfoot has in the past demanded solid proof when it comes to sexual assault, and has been a staunch critic of false accusers and weak evidence in multiple videos.
Of course, like with any celebrity, you're going to get Lacey's fans coming forward to defend her. And you get all of these absurd defenses by Trump and Trump supporters. You know, it's sort of tribalism thing. It's the halo effect, you know.
That halo effect around a perpetrator can be so strong that you can have cases like Cosby's where nearly 60 women come forward and report and people still don't believe that anything happened.
Yeah, I mean, there are literally dozens of accusations that Lacey has raped people. Yet there are still people who believe that she did nothing wrong. That all these women are lying. Jesus, guys, it's not exactly like there's a disagreement over the facts here.
Where nearly 60 women come forward and report and people still don't believe that anything happened.
And yeah, you know what? The more accusations people make, the more likely it is to be true. Trump is the one who is bragging about groping women because he could get away with it.
I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it.
After all, who needs a legal justice system to determine innocence or guilt when you can just listen and believe? Trump is the one who is bragging.
When you're a star, they let you do it.
After all, who needs a legal justice system to determine innocence or guilt when you can just listen and believe?
But now he seems more than willing to accept Trump boasting like an ass with the guys as evidence enough to convict, at least in the court of public opinion anyway. What the fuck? And it's actually worse than that because, like much less intelligent critics of Trump, Thunderfoot thinks he lies about everything. Everything is Trump bombast and bluster, and there's nothing behind it.
Yeah, this is what American universities really need. To make America great again is the ShamWow guy in an expensive suit.
Everything, that is, except the damning, self-incriminating stuff he says when he's bullshitting with the guys, apparently.
Trump is the one who is bragging about groping women.
That stuff Thunderfoot, like many others, will accept as true, uncritically, because it confirms some anti-Trump bias that they harbor. Well, except for the part where Trump says women let famous guys do the things he's boasting about doing himself.
And when you're a star, they let you do it.
In other words, we'll believe everything except the part where they give consent to have their genitals groped. Because Thunderfoot magically wants this little bit to be a lie hidden within what he'd like to portray as a larger truth from someone he claims lies all the time. Talk about threading the needle finely here. And this comes from someone who understands the effect money has on women in general.
Yes, sex is used as a commodity in all walks of life. And yes, sometimes it's used by women to coerce men to do things as well.
Again, what the fuck? Whatever way most conveniently confirms his anti-Trump bias. That's how he's going to parse Trump's words. Of all the mistakes I believe he's making here, in preferring Hillary over Trump, this is probably the most unforgivable logical error, especially given the source and his previous lasting commitment to convincing evidence and logical consistency. Apologies if all this comes across as me acting like a sore winner or rubbing it in or something, since I prefer Trump and he actually won the election. That's not how I intend it. I probably should have stressed right from the start that I'm not in love with the idea of a Trump presidency. I'm not Milo Yiannopoulos here. I just prefer him over Hillary for many reasons, some of which I hope I've made clear in this video. I'm not predicting the demise of Thunderfoot either, but all of this does seem quite out of character. Something other than devotion to science and facts alone has to be driving his choice here. And if I were to stick my neck out and guess, I'd say it's a bit too much listening to Sam Harris's opinion on the election. Now I'm going to move on to a totally different topic that's still related to the election, and that topic is all the public figures who vowed to move to a different country if Trump won. And before I get into it, I want to point out here that the same friend who alerted me to the problem of progressive peer pressure in academia and the silence that it causes, that I mentioned earlier in this video, brought this brilliant little nugget to my attention as well. I should probably interview him someday and upload it, because I think my subs would be fascinated by his viewpoints, but he would be taking a great personal risk expressing them publicly. Such are the infuriating times in which we live, unfortunately. May a Trump presidency work to alleviate, to some extent, that miserable state of affairs? Anyway, some of these celebrities who said they would move seem to be serious, and some not so much. It really doesn't matter to me whether or not they were serious. It has no bearing on the point I'm about to make. We'd probably be better off if most of these idiots did go elsewhere, I will say that. But I doubt they have the guts to go through with it. Though I must say losing Walter White or Heisenberg or whatever you want to call him would sadden me quite a bit.
Well, if come the election, Brian, if he does win, do you fancy an extended vacation to Vancouver?
It wouldn't be a vacation. I'd be an expatriate.
Come and join
absolutely.
me.
I would definitely move.
Let me real quick read some statements from other famous people from a thehill.com article. Lena Dunham told Andy Cohen at the Matrix Awards that, quote, "I know a lot of people have been threatening to do this, but I really will. I know a lovely place in Vancouver," unquote. Neve Campbell, an actress on the political drama House of Cards, vowed to move back home to Canada. Barbara Streisand, a vocal Clinton supporter, told 60 Minutes that, quote, "I'm either coming to your country if you let me in, or Canada," unquote. Neo told TMZ last month that he'd move to Canada and be neighbors with fellow R&B singer Drake if the country elected Trump. Keegan-Michael Key said he would flee north to Canada, and so on. So even if they were all joking, there's one thing we should seriously consider about their statements or jokes or whatever they are, and that's the destination they've chosen, Canada. Why not Mexico? If Trump is so racist for wanting to build a wall between the US and Mexico, why do none of these people want to move to Mexico? Why are they choosing to move to a country that's whiter than our own? You know, largely on the Thinking Apes recommendations, or Stardust, I've started to listen to Millennial Woe's channel, and before my paltry number of subs start unsubscribing like mad, no, I have not gone white nationalist. Don't panic. If you care to know what my honest view of the alt-right is, I think the analysis that comes closest to my own estimation of them is a really great video by Coltane. I've linked to this video below in the video description, so definitely check it out. It is a flat-out fucking masterful breakdown. And just as an aside, it is incredibly pleasing to me that many alt-right haters are shallow enough to detest MGTOW as well. You know, they're all just evil men who get grouped together and there's no differences between them. And yet these same people could never in a million monkey typewriter years craft such a thorough dissection of the alt-right. They couldn't even come close. They couldn't touch it. And you know the type of shallow, left-leaning, gynocentric, social justice warrior idiots I'm talking about here. So I'm not buying a lot of what the alt-right is selling, and despite disagreeing with him quite often, I still somehow manage to find Millennial Woe's content informative and thoughtful, especially when he is critical of social justice regressives. In a recent video where he went into a Whole Foods in Portland, Oregon for the first time, he's apparently visiting America, touring America, and he's probably still traveling within the United States at the time of this recording. Anyway, in this video where he went into Whole Foods, he made an excellent point about the hidden casual racism of the left and how they never seem to take as much heat for it as the right. He kind of accused Whole Foods and its customers of perpetuating a white-topia, and rightly so. And I think this is symptomatic, this white-topia that they're creating, and the lack of acknowledging the fact that they're doing it, is symptomatic of the same liberal elitist hypocrisy that allows these celebrities, these Hollywood types, to instinctively choose Canada over Mexico as their Trump-fleeing destination without anyone calling them out for it. Anyway, that's more than enough rambling for one video, I would think. In closing, I just want to touch on the post-election riots, which at the time of this recording were still ongoing and even intensifying. I suppose the irony of the side which demanded before the election that everyone accept the results, now having violent tantrums and meltdowns because Trump won, is lost on nobody. The amount of paranoia about Trump and these people is staggering, and I gotta admit, somewhat troubling to me. I mean, they actually think they can make a fairly elected leader go away because they wrote a bunch of progressive bullshit on a sign. What are they even protesting? Do they even know? These are the same idiots who didn't utter a peep after the primaries were rigged for Hillary, and now they're losing their shit over a fair election. I don't know whether to consider their lack of logic and mindlessness to be a sign nothing serious can come of their riots, or a sign that it will in fact bloom into something serious like a civil war. Equality, empathy, economics. What? Why would you take to the streets with a sign that sounds like the title of a really fucking boring TED Talk? What the fuck is the point of putting those three words together? And why are you willing to make a violent last stand over this esoteric point? It's totally fucking bizarre and senseless. And just look at this one tweet from someone who thinks the celebration of Trump's victory means she's going to be assaulted or raped or whatever. What drugs do you have to be on in order to look at an image of jubilant strangers you will likely never encounter in your life and assume that means violence is headed your way? Who the fuck thinks this way? It's just fucking so out there. I just don't know what to make of it. Problem as I see it is there's nothing in these people's fears that normal people can even wrap their heads around. There's no making a connection with their worries. Their worries make no sense. There's nothing sensible there. I mean, there's nothing you can say to these people to talk them down from the ledge because nothing about their reasoning for being out on the ledge makes a shred of fucking sense. And that's what concerns me. Trump hasn't even taken office yet, and look what's going on. I just I just really hope nothing serious comes of this pointless violence and it all just kind of fades away. Anyway, let's keep our fingers crossed, and thanks for tuning in.